Hi, this is Ty from Seeking Boston Marathon and the Butterfly Pavilion podcast. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, also on YouTube's podcast platform. Find us on social, Instagram, TikTok, listed as Butterfly Pavilion Pod. Quick fan mail. I'm basically the progressive commercial, you don't want to become your dad, or however that goes. So I always walk into random awkward conversations, as my wife tells me. Anyway, went to pick up prescriptions yesterday at Walgreens. I had previously shared the podcast. The manager there was very excited to see me, and she said, I listened to your podcast. There's a long pause. She said it was kind of hard to listen to. Of course, it was pretty heavy laying the stage 4 cancer news down in the first podcast. But she said it was inspirational, and she said your daughter's amazing, which I would have to agree. Now let's get into this month's episode. The challenge is I'm a co-host, but also the producer of the Butterfly Pavilion podcast. So I've got to multitask here, which is hard for a person with long COVID. Anyway, I'm pleased to have Dr. David Putrino with us today on the Butterfly Pavilion podcast. He's currently the director of rehabilitation innovation at Mount Sinai Health System and a professor in the Department of Rehabilitation and Human Performance at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. David's research has been featured on ABC, Sports Illustrated, Wall Street Journal, the BBC, Wired Magazine, and he also made my long COVID superhero list as Batman. So we're pleased to have Putrino / Batman with us today. Maybe that's a word salad for your title. I mentioned Nikki won't be joining us today. She's busy with a new job, so she's here in spirit. You wear a lot of hats, so looking at that title, can you kind of explain your day job? You work with you're involved with PolyBio. You do a lot of things with other researchers. How could you explain your world or your day in a life?
Yeah. So, the best way to think about my job is when I started at Mount Sinai, the sort of general directive that I was given was, in the United States, if there is a thing, an intervention, a medicine, whatever that could be helping a patient, the general amount of time it takes to get from that first successful trial to the point where it's actually in the wild helping people is 14 to 17 years. And my directive was, in the rehab world, let's shrink.
That's a scary number.
It is a scary number. Yeah.
For people, impacted.
Absolutely.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, you're right. It's a number that I usually, when I give it, you get a lot of gasps in the room that, like, there could be some life-saving treatment or some amazing therapy that really, just because of bureaucratic, inertia, is being held back from patients. And so our mission has always been, how do we get these things from bench to bedside as quickly as possible? How do we bypass all of this inertia in a way that is still responsible and still safe, but finding which rules that we can break and breaking those rules to make sure that patients get access to things as quickly as possible. And we started out with one center that was focused on neurological injury. So we work with spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, stroke. And pretty quickly we were, it was quite clear that the approach was working well. We were helping a lot of patients. And, as of 2026, we have 6 different centers, and each center has its own specific clinical focus. And one of those centers is called the Cohen Center for Recovery from Complex Chronic Illness,
Gotcha.
Which is focused on infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses like long COVID, ME/CFS, chronic tick and vector-borne illness, hypermobility, joint hypermobility spectrum disorders, fibromyalgia, etc. A day in the life for me is, I really just run around trying to make sure that the lights stay on in all of those centers. And so, one day I might be working with athletes, trying to do something that's not been done before. Another day I'll be working with people with long COVID. Another day I'll be working with someone who has just had, a very severe stroke, and we're trying to wake them up out of a disordered consciousness state. So I get a lot of diversity in the work that I do, which I feel is very helpful for me because it keeps me creative and it keeps me close to the problems that I'm trying to solve.
Sure.
But I also have just a wonderful team that keeps me sane and does the hard work.
Great. So I should back up a half a step. The Butterfly Pavilion we started as a bit of a journal for my journey. That is a combination of both stage 4 cancer and long COVID. So I joked before we hit the record button. I've been engaged with David Putrino, our guest, for literally years now. I think that's the beauty of, I still call it Twitter, where you can engage with experts and you have access to papers and treatments and ideas. So I think it's a wonderful community. It can go dark. It can go ugly.
It can go dark.
We can maybe talk about that. The second half of that first question. So maybe you could also explain polybio. And then I know you work with Van Elzeker and Akiko, who we've met. So how does talk a bit about polybio and perhaps how you engage with other researchers?
Yeah, again, across all of the centers that I work in, we're always interested in finding like-minded people. The status quo as a researcher is that you go to the NIH, the National Institutes for Health, you write grants. On average, it takes you 2 or 3 goes to get a grant, which means 3 or 4 years on average to actually get something funded. And they tend to be very sort of slow, safe grants. So you get a grant, you're good for 5 years, you do very incremental research, and then you sort of like rinse and repeat for the course of your career.
Right.
And our team, because we like innovation to move a lot faster than that, our team tries to seek out people who are moving at the same pace as us. So when we entered into this infection-associated chronic condition and illnesses space, one of the first people I met was Amy Pearl, total force of nature. And she sort of came in and was like, we're going to do this and we're going to do that.
She's
and
also a superhero.
She is, in every sense of the word.
Right.
And we were like, okay, polybio is a group that we want to work with. And in fact, I went as far as to say, Amy, can you be our scientific director? Because I can only do so much running around between 6 centers, but I need someone who has the same drive and has the same sense of urgency that we do, directing a lot of the scientific questions. And also on top of that, Amy's a microbiologist. I'm a physical therapist with a PhD in neuroscience. I can only do too much when we're talking about pathogens, pathogen persistence. I've been drinking from the fire hose in terms of learning, but someone with Amy's expertise, when we really think that a lot of these illnesses have such an important, pathogens have such an important role to play, a microbiologist is the right person to sit in that hot seat. And then similarly with Akiko, Akiko actually cold emailed me out of the blue in sort of peak first wave COVID, when we started seeing long COVID patients at Mount Sinai. And I immediately sort of latched onto Akiko like a life raft, because again, I was like, well, what the hell do I know about the immune system? I have no business evaluating the immune system, but I really know that there is an immune component going on here. So rather than put the blinkers on and ignore the immune component, let's find someone who has a stellar track record, who also moves fast, because Akiko moves fast, and is willing to work with me. So that was really how we started to all collaborate. And then I always have to shout out, Polybio. I frequently am heard, superheroes are your thing, Tyler. I'm frequently heard calling Amy Prohl the Oppenheimer of long COVID, because the long COVID sort of collaborative network that she's built through Polybio is just some of the most talented people who aren't necessarily the most famous and glamorous people in the research world, although some of them absolutely are, but some of them are people like me, but they're just effective and they're fast and they're again feeling that urgency to move the needle.
Right. Yeah, I subscribe to the it takes a village approach, and I've taken some heat on some of my long COVID heroes, and and we'll get into some of the community dynamics. But I personally think we want everyone we can working on this problem, and the brightest people in the world working on this problem. So the Van Elzekers and Amy and Akiko, and yourself, obviously. So because this is something that affects 30 million Americans, and there is no the biomarkers are vague. The biomarkers are coming out. I've actually got the Bruce Patterson biomarkers through Rhythm. That was part of my final you've got long COVID. But anyway, for people that may not walk your walk every day, every week, I asked the same question to Akiko. How would you explain you're at a dinner party and someone doesn't know what long COVID is, or there's the person at the table that, whether it's politics or, they're ingrained with anybody that's sick, they automatically go to, it's the jab. What is the prevalence of long COVID, and how would you explain what long COVID is to those people?
Yeah. So what I usually explain, in a situation like that is I just talk about the fact that there appears to be a subset of individuals who, after a COVID infection, fail to recover from that COVID infection. They fail to return to their baseline level of health after that COVID infection. And what we now know is that this new virus, this SARS-CoV-2 virus, has a number of different ways where it can significantly impact someone's physiology to stop them from fully recovering. So
I think physiology, if I may interrupt, physiology is a key word there versus psychology. Because there's so many people that think it's in your head and yada, yada, yada. But I'm sorry, but please go ahead.
You're 100% correct. So when I'm asked about it, because I am asked about it in different settings, people are like, "Oh, you do like long COVID stuff? Is that real?" And so I then tend to usually go on and say, like, we run a clinic that has seen several thousand people. We see people from all walks of life, all political leanings. It doesn't actually seem to matter where in life you come from. You can still get long COVID. And then I also go on to, when people say, well, it's just the jab, I do tell them, look, we're one of the few labs that has actually published work on vaccine injury. And we're actively looking into vaccine injury, and we believe in vaccine injury. But we also have a number of people who were sick before the vaccines that we treat. And we also know that there's just a far greater number of individuals who...
There's the dogs at the Butterfly Pavilion at the door. Frequent guests.
Love them.
I think mom must be home.
So I just go on to explain that, we don't need to create these polarizing situations where everything is one thing and nothing is the other thing. Like, we don't need to choose teams here. This is not a team sport. This is, this is trying to understand physiology. This is trying to understand pathology, and there's room for both. Honestly, obviously there are some extremists out there in the world,
Sure.
but most people in the real world, when you're having a real world conversation and you validate their point of view. So if someone says, I think it's all the jabs, and you say, listen, I can understand where you're coming from, but we see both. And I validate that vaccine injury does exist. Most of the time they're like, well, that's really cool that you're also looking into vaccine injury. I very rarely get like, no, it's all the jabs. It's like, no, it's, like, I agree with you. Some people have had this adverse event, but also some people got COVID verifiably and had never had a vaccine and then never recovered,
Yeah, I think you're probably somewhat aware of my story. I was a what they call a first waiver with a mild onset. So I got sick in January of 2020 and was traveling the globe. So I hit airports in Munich, Cape Town, Seattle, and came home. Actually, it was on the trip I started to feel ill. Came home and just felt, like a common garden variety virus. But within 2 months, I was an active marathon runner. Within 2 months, I couldn't run a mile. And trying to work through that illness, I had a 100-day fever in 2020. And a lot of people catch me with that. They were like, oh, you had a 100-degree fever? I'm like, yes, I did, for 100 days.
Yeah.
And that snowballed into a laundry list of physiological damage, as we discussed. But I appreciate you sharing that, elevator discussion or cocktail party discussion. We'll get into some of the details of trials and treatments. I listened to a couple of your interviews last week, but we are off the heels of Long COVID Awareness Day, which was March 15th, Long COVID Awareness Week, and all of March is Long COVID Awareness Month. How was your week? I know you had a couple of interviews. What was your response to the week? Did it feel different than the last year? Because I think we've had it for a few years now.
Yeah. I know that it's a really, I want to say this sensitively, because I know that it's a really tough time for a lot of people, because, something that we notice in our clinic is around holiday times, we often get the most frantic messages. And I think it's just because it's such a painful reminder. It's like, okay, it's another Easter, it's another Christmas, it's another Passover, it's another event where I'm still sick and I don't have answers. And I feel like Long COVID Awareness Day, week, month feels that way to many people who are suffering with long COVID. And I really feel that. And we get a lot of messages over this period of time. But for me, I suppose I'm cursed with the sort of statistics in my head of every year when I'm reflecting on what we've learned and how our clinical practice has changed. I feel hopeful because we are incrementally getting more people better. We are, and we are rolling out treatments that are starting to show clinical trial results that are more encouraging. And we're doing clinical research that is really sort of elucidating things that could be a biomarker, or at least helping us understand the pathobiology, what's going wrong in the body a little bit more deeply and better each year. And I don't think that, I frequently say as well, like if someone tells you that they've found the magic bullet that cures all long COVID, that they're selling the magic bullets. I think that the solution is going to be incremental, and it's also what I sort of educate on when I'm out there teaching PCPs and things like that about our clinic and long COVID management. It is an incremental approach. One day you don't know what you're doing, and you can only maybe recommend fluids and vagus nerve stimulation. The next day you learn about antihistamines, and now you can help 5% more of your patients. And then the next day you learn about ivabradine and other POTS medications, and you can help another 2%. The next day you learn about the Icahn protocol, and that's another 2% helped. So it is an incremental journey, which is hellishly frustrating for everyone who feels the urgency.
Or hellscape, yeah, that's appropriate.
But every year I think about, and this is also why we started to build out the manual, is we wanted to be able to update people on, okay, here's all this new stuff that you can do. And this is how it's different from 6 months ago. And I really feel that again this year. We're coming off the back of 2 successful small trials that we're moving into larger pivotal clinical trials, and so I'm feeling encouraged.
Yeah, that's my quick comment on the day, Long COVID Awareness Day. I hopped onto I think Becky's space on X. It can be depressing is an understatement, because there's just absolutely heartbreaking stories. We're now starting to lose people, literally die from this, or one of those pillars, if you will. Because just kind of recapping what you said, it is not one symptom. When you say you've got long COVID, so equating it to you go into the ER and you got a broken leg, that's very specific, and you got a very specific playbook to that. A long COVID is a matrix or kaleidoscope of symptoms, and I think what you're saying is we're starting to maybe attack some of those symptoms, and hopefully we get to a point where we can either prevent or treat what is attacking the entire body, because it attacks its neuroinflammation, its mitochondria damage, endothelial damage, vasculitis. It's a long list, not to mention the crippling fatigue, and then also the cognitive piece. You mentioned the manual, so that's maybe a good jump point to the manual you released. Maybe talk a little bit about that manual. I also saw that Rhythm and Patient Led also came out with a similar, cookbook, if you will. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. We wanted to release something that was inclusive of as many infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses as possible. That really just gave a roadmap for what we do in our clinic. And, we have this sort of disclaimer up the front of we're not trying to sort of say that we're the be all and end all. We're not trying to say that we're the only voice to listen to, but we are saying that we've had enough questions about how we run our clinic that we were here it is. We don't want to be a destination clinic. We want to be, a sort of center that other people can learn from freely and easily and openly, so that centers can open up all across the United States that provide skilled, compassionate, informed care on these conditions. And so that was the impetus for releasing the manual, and of course releasing it freely. And so what we tried to do was one portion of the manual is just explaining the different diagnoses and how we go about, our providers in the clinic go about diagnosing different infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses. So the diagnostic guidelines that we use to make specific diagnoses. And then we sort of talk about, look, there's so many different symptoms. Kaleidoscope is a really good descriptor of like, if you just look at publications on long COVID, the 200 plus symptoms associated with long COVID. So rather than trying to answer a question of how do you treat fatigue, which when you understand how diverse the presentations of long COVID can be, asking that question kind of doesn't make sense, because are you experiencing fatigue because you have an autoimmune condition? Are you experiencing fatigue because you're not sleeping? Are you experiencing fatigue because of autonomic or mitochondrial problems? So we tried to sort of collapse many of these symptoms into how do we assess for what might be driving those symptoms? So how do we assess for mitochondrial dysfunction? How do we assess for autonomic dysfunction? How do we assess for autoimmunity, vascular problems, etc.? And we put that into the manual of, like, again, not this is the fundamental way of doing it, but this is how we do it. These are the blood tests that we order. This is what we do. And then if they come back positive, what do we do about it? This is our first line, second line, third line. And so we're trying to make it as paint by numbers as possible in an evidence-based way. So everything that we have there has references associated with it. That really helps providers who maybe don't have a roadmap to just have a roadmap, and seeing the patient-led rhythm work as well, which is, phenomenal. I really like the way that they've done things as well. We work with rhythm and patient-led a lot, so always appreciate everything that they're bringing to the table as well.
Yeah, I also like the term kaleidoscope, because you pick it up at a given morning and you turn it, and those prisms are different. So I may have one day where I'm having severe fatigue. I may have a day where I'm feeling the flu. I've got days where out of the blue, I've got shortness of breath, and it's for those listeners out there, it's not a panic attack. I could be calm as could be, and my pulse ox drops into low 90s, sometimes into the high 80s, close to what my doctor says. Well, you go to the ER when it drops below a certain point. So it is a kaleidoscope. It's called a provider manual. Are you seeing that it also could be, something for the patient that they could, drill down into an area that they've got small fiber neuropathy, and they can go into their doc and maybe have a more educated conversation? So is it for patient and doctor, I guess, is the question?
We definitely wanted, we called it a provider manual because the intention behind the document was, if you were a provider who wanted to build your own long COVID clinic, here it is. This is the manual that you can follow, and you can have a self-sustainable long COVID clinic. Because, like, even in the back, we share all the billing codes that we use to make sure that insurance covers the interventions that we're recommending.
Right. Because, again, to interject, I mean, long COVID clinics, there's discussion of some long COVID clinics shutting down. I don't want to pick on a state because I'll pick the wrong one where there happens to be a long COVID clinic, but it's not ubiquitous by any standpoint. So it's hard for somebody, in a small state without a clinic to get to New York City.
Yeah.
I actually work with Rhythm, still my provider of record. Obviously, I'm chasing cancer. It's kind of like you got a broken leg, but then you're profusely bleeding out of this other area. Well, I've got cancer, so right now it's a priority, but we're still trying to treat symptoms, if you will. On the manual, so thank you for that. On the manual, I commend you, because there was some language that around post-exertion malaise, or you can it was interpreted as you can exercise your way out of long COVID. You came out very quickly with a clarification in the manual. Maybe you could speak just on that, how that experience went down, but also specifically the exercise component. I do hear very small numbers of people that have gotten better, that can now go hiking again or whatever. But maybe you could talk about that very specific area of exercise and PEM.
No, absolutely. I mean, that was a and I'll conflate two things here, because I think sometimes these are things that the community needs to hear as well. There are ways to provide feedback, and there are ways to not provide feedback. And I don't say it in terms of wanting to protect my precious little feelings, but I do say it in terms of actually the person who authored that section is a person who lives with an infection-associated complex chronic illness, is a DPT, and which is a doctor of physical therapy, and actively treats many, many people who have long COVID, ME/CFS, and others, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So it was written from a point of view of deep empathy, as well as extraordinary clinical knowledge. And I do understand that the language was ambiguous. And obviously we said, okay, we can understand where a misunderstanding is happening, and we can understand the stakes of not wanting the wrong person to misunderstand this language. But I think it's also important for the community to sort of internalize that, like, a human being is on the other side of this, a human being actually in this case who has the lived experience, because around 40% of our providers in our clinic or our staff in our clinic have lived experience of IACCI. And that's a very intentional hiring process that we go through, because we want that lived experience in our clinic. So, what we're trying to get to with the role of exercise and the role of, again, symptom titrated physical activity, is that first and foremost, when some people have POTS, and if I can get slightly technical, if you were to do a full autonomic suite evaluation on 1,000 people with long COVID, meaning tilt table tests, so they get on this contraption that
I've had that.
Pops them up and down. At the same time, we're measuring how much you're sweating, we're measuring what your blood pressure is doing, what your heart rate is doing, etc. If you do that sort of autonomic suite assessment on 1,000 people with long COVID, the literature tells us that probably 700 will test positive for dysautonomia broadly. They will meet some sort of criterion for being diagnosed with a dysautonomia. If you zero in on that, probably around 20% of that 700 people, so maybe 140 people, will have what we call significant cardiovagal dysfunction, which means that their blood pressure is actually kind of okay. Their blood pressure doesn't move around all that much, but their heart rate really does fluctuate quite a bit. The literature tells us that sort of subset of the subset, they're the folks who are going to actually tolerate exercise okay. And they're the folks, and believe me, they exist, who are going to tell you, but actually exercise really helps me, and you're online, possibly chronically online as much as I am. And you often see this when the debate happens, right? You see this, like, there's a whole bunch of people who are like, don't say the word exercise and avoid, we need to avoid exercise. And then there'll be one person that pops up and is like, actually, exercise really helped me. And, I'm sorry to say that, but, that's my lived experience. And so what we're starting to see in the literature and what we're starting to see in our own clinic as well is those are those folks, those people who have cardiovagal dysfunction and nothing else, which we can identify with a tilt table test by looking at the way that their heart rate changes, but not their blood pressure during certain provocation tests. Those are the folks who are most likely to be that person in the Twitter thread who says, but exercise is really helpful for me.
Yeah, I probably should have prefaced that I was not one of those with a pitchfork.
Oh no, I know you were.
And the flame on the end of the whatever they call that, storming the castle of your clinic.
And look, I mean, I also know that I also want to not preface anymore, but postface with the idea that
prologue.
I was going to say, what is the prologue? But I also want to say that, again, we always act on feedback. We always take feedback, and we try and make our services better, our clinicians better, everything that we're doing better. But with my gentle reminder, because I shield a lot of my team from this sort of thing, my gentle reminder is that we're always going to act on feedback, but you can deliver the feedback in a way that doesn't make someone cry on the other end of the computer, and we'll still act on it just as strongly and just as seriously.
Sure, and I'll circle back to that. On that topic of post-exertion malaise or post-exertion symptom exacerbation, I was a marathon runner and triathlete.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually training for a half marathon that was supposed to be on March 15th of 2020, literally 6 years ago. The world shut down.
Yeah.
It's odd to even think back to that time. Airport shut down, world shut down. And I virtually ran the race because I was actually supposed to push my Team Hoyt buddy Liam in a race. I ran that even though I was already feeling sick, but again, mild onset, because a runner's mentality is if it's above the head, you continue to train. Yep. And if it's flu, you don't, So I'm like, well, damn it, I'm going to run this, 13.1 miles. I did. I actually felt pretty good. Went out for dinner that night. And the next day I had a crash that was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And within 2 months, within 2 months, I couldn't run a mile. Yeah. So it was a severe drop off. So it certainly wasn't deconditioning, because that's the other, they'll jump right to, oh, well, it's deconditioning. I'm like, well, no, I was heavily trained to run a 13-mile race, but anyway, I digress, as we often do on the podcast. I do want to thank you though, because you did respond quickly, and because exercise, you can't exercise your way out of long COVID is a good general statement.
100%.
There are corner cases and conditions of that prism perhaps that have had some relief or success,
and you can't. And more specifically, you can't exercise your way out of PEM. And
right.
And as we continue to learn with Rob Wust's brilliant work and David Systrom's brilliant work, post-exertional malaise is such a physiological phenomenon that can now be measured. It's not easy to measure it. You need a muscle biopsy if you're following Wust's protocols, and you need to do invasive CPET if you're following Systrom's protocols. Invasive CPET basically being they put a catheter into your heart and they put you on a treadmill. But
I've had that one too.
Yeah, you've had it all.
I've done it all. Yeah.
But the point is, it can be measured, and it's a phenomenon that we're just starting to understand, and it's a phenomenon that categorically we know is harmed or exacerbated by unnecessary, undue exertion beyond the energy envelope that you have.
Gotcha. I want to switch gears just a little bit. First off, long COVID does not discern between demographics, socioeconomic status, although you can be impacted socioeconomically by your ability to, go to clinics like I had the privilege of doing. But it has become political, unfortunately. Research grants, I think Dr. Catherine Young had a graph for some research. I saw it on Vox as well. Vox, not Fox, that NIH new fundings are down 91%. There have been hundreds of millions of dollars of grants that have been canceled. The National Cancer Institute budget was hacked by 40%. How do we, that's depressing. All of those things are very depressing. Where do you see that going? I know you were part of RFK Jr.'s roundtable last September. The first 10 minutes I was enthused. I'm like, wow, they've got the right people in the room. I know speaking to Akiko, that was November. So it's been a few months now.
Yeah.
There was no follow-up. So RFK Jr. called it a consortium. By the way, they had a consortium in January that they canceled. So this was like, I guess, a rejiggered consortium, if you will, in September. Maybe a two-part question. How do you see the landscape going, knowing that we need to tap into those resources, and anything specific you can talk about? I know there's been follow-up on Lyme. I think Amy was actually in an HSS panel in the last week, but maybe two-part question. That landscape, I know that's scary, but then anything specifically you can talk about in terms of any follow-up you might have with the consortium round two.
Yeah, I think it's government always moves slow.
Sure.
There's a reason why I think 5% of our funding across my division comes from NIH, because when you're involved in disruptive innovation, you can't wait for government to make decisions on things, and so the way I interact with government is always cautiously and just like, I'll believe it when I see it kind of thing. Like words are nice, but actions are much, much better. So it's really my posture is always show, don't tell.
Sure.
And what I will say is it was encouraging to have the engagement. It was encouraging to have a HHS director say, I believe in these illnesses, I believe in vaccine injury, I believe in chronic tick and vector-borne illness, and we want to, increase the level of education. And I also will say that since then, we've had conversations with representatives from ARPA-H and HHS about like what's going to be done about it. Like, is there going to be an ARPA-H mechanism that pushes, aggressive and, and meaningful discovery work in long COVID? And, to the extent possible, the promise that HHS made at the end of the consortium meeting was we'll get resources online. And one of the first things that they did was take our manual and put it online, put it on the hhs.gov website. So I can't fault them on that front. What I will say, on the con side of things is in general, no matter what side of the political spectrum you land on, the neutral thing that you can say about this administration is that there's just large sweeping change, right? You can call it positive, you can call it negative, but it is large sweeping change. And that always brings with it chaos. And unfortunately, in government, creating chaos lengthens timelines. And I
Right.
think that's 100% what we're seeing here, is that there is chaos and there is lengthened timelines between what someone says that they're going to do and what actually happens. And so I'm continuing to engage with HHS in good faith. of saying like, and frequently am saying, look, you don't need to give the money to me. Like, I don't, whatever money theoretically exists, like, I don't usually do federal funding, but like, spend some money on some good bets, like
Sure.
fund a monoclonal antibody clinical trial, fund, work into spike protein biomarker discovery. Like, these are the things that should have been done in 2020, should have been done in 2021. If you really want to be a heroic administration around long COVID, that's how you do it.
Right. I think the answer's got to be a combination of things. Meaning, if we wait for the government, that's the wrong strategy.
Yeah.
Having said that, they've got billions of dollars available that we should pour into monoclonal as an example. So we can't give up but it's maybe that's why they have elections. Is maybe the only way to sum that up. But I'm hoping that we can at least apply enough pressure to get that consortium back together again, because those were world experts in the room talking about the topic. I think the community is little over awareness. I mean, Representative, I think it was Clyburn, had a committee back in 2021, and Monica DeVore Gutierrez from Texas was there, and that was all about, we'll explain what long COVID is. But here we are, the September meeting looked a lot different in that there were more experts in the room, and they were talking about, meaningful trials and next steps. I just certainly wish that they would, get that group back together again and have some tangible action and, unfreeze this grant money.
Yeah, I agree there.
Yeah, so maybe now that we've completely depressed the audience, I kind of had the same conversation with Akiko. I know you announced, is it Farion?
Farion.
There's some peer review studies. Maybe you could just talk for a few minutes about some of the trials that you're seeing, and I know Farion is one of them. It was interesting, while you are chatting, I've certainly tried to do my part. My experience with rhythm was, it had its benefit because it helped me, at least in North America, with my disability journey, because I had so much documentation about multi-system damage to my body. But another trip I took was up to Van Elzeker's lab. This is a paper. I believe I was part of this study, but it's all anonymized. But he had a combination PET MRI scan to look at neuroinflammation that would lead to cognitive issues. I sound like I don't have cognitive issues, but there are moments when my wife will ask me a question and she gets a blank stare, and it resembles a lot like my dad's dementia. But anyway, I wanted to pop up that slide from Van Elzeker's. But if you could, cheer us up with maybe some of the trials in the Farion peer-reviewed study.
I mean, first and foremost, what you pulled up, isn't that just a beautiful figure in terms of when people tell you there are no biomarkers for long COVID, and you show a figure like that where we're seeing very clear neuroinflammation in this cohort of people who experience cognitive impairment, even when the cognitive impairment is dynamic. So as you say, you can host a podcast one moment and then the next moment be asked a question and completely blank out, because that is the nature of dynamic disability. Even though people are experiencing that in long COVID, we still have folks like Van Elzeker able to show it on a scan very, 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 very cleanly.
Right.
And that figure is really one of the sort of the crux of what we were trying to get at with the Farion device, where it's a first in class novel piece of technology that uses a therapeutic technique called microtesla magnetic therapy. Basically, the founders of this company sort of read about MMT, microtesla magnetic therapy, some sort of like couple of early papers in the 70s and 80s where everyone was like, yeah, this is a thing, but like it's hard to make, so we're not going to, we're not going to build it, but it's a thing. And they said, okay, well, let's build this thing. And effectively what this device does is it sits on your head. It pulses low energy magnetic fields from one side of the device to the other, so that you and the sort of like area that it accesses is the whole brain. And what these low energy magnetic fields in animal models appear to trigger is something called mitohormesis. So it stresses your mitochondria in your nervous system just enough that it results in a anti-inflammatory effect in the brain, and it in animal models, again, it reduces neuroinflammation. We're yet to prove that it reduces neuroinflammation in humans, but what we did was the next best thing. We took individuals who had long COVID and cognitive impairment, and their cognitive impairment had to be validated by a neuropsychologist, and it had to be their cognitive scoring had to be abnormal. So it wasn't, so we didn't include folks who reported cognitive impairment, although we obviously believe folks who say, listen, I have cognitive impairment, but when they sit with a neuropsychologist, they score normal, which is a large proportion of people with long COVID. It was individuals who actually scored as impaired. And they got randomized into either a placebo arm or a treatment arm, active treatment arm. The trial itself was triple blind. What that means is that the therapist that was providing the therapy did not know if they were providing the placebo or the real therapy, because the device just sort of turned on, made some noises, and either provided a intangible magnetic field or it didn't. The patients were, of course, blinded to whether they had been randomized to treatment and assessment. And then we had individual assessors who were, their only job was to assess patients that were sent to them. And they were also blinded. They didn't know if the person was in the active treatment arm or the placebo arm. So what was very exciting about this trial was that we saw improvements in cognition that we would call sort of moderate-sized effects. So people went from being cognitively impaired mildly to not being cognitively impaired, or not, and also in some cases not even reporting cognitive impairment. It wasn't all the patients, but participants, but it was a large proportion, and it outperformed placebo, which is something that is super exciting, especially in the absence of a biomarker. Just being able to say generally providing this therapy was helpful. The other thing that really got us excited about this trial was it's a first-in-human trial, meaning we have done animal studies, but this was the first time that this trial was being done in a human. And so usually when we transfer from animals to humans, we do what's called a safety feasibility trial, which is exactly what this trial was. The primary endpoints were safety. Did it cause any adverse events? And feasibility. Did people use it the way they were supposed to? And full marks on both of those. So we had no adverse events. And from a feasibility standpoint, we had 100% adherence to the protocol, because long COVID patients are the best, as we all know. They will do everything that you ask. So safety, feasibility, tick, tick. You rarely in a first-in-human trial, rarely do you expect to see efficacy signal, because you don't know how to dose in people, when you've only been dosing in mice prior to that. But especially with a totally novel therapeutic intervention. So what you typically do is you do the lowest possible dose that is least likely to cause adverse events, and you just hope for the best. And in this case, the dosage that was selected was still enough to cause cognitive gains. And what was particularly cool about this trial was we went from baseline to 4 weeks of therapy, and then we had a 8-week follow-up. So they stopped the therapy after 4 weeks and then went away with their lives, and 4 weeks later came back for another assessment. And what we saw was from baseline to treatment to 8 weeks, people continued to improve cognitively. So we're feeling pretty bullish about this. These results are hopeful and strong. I know that cognitive impairment is one of the most concerning symptoms that most people with long COVID and other infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses will tell us, look, I can live without movement if you tell me I have to live without movement, but I want my mind,
Right. I actually, I've got a blog post. Hard to keep track of all the media, and I've got to try to migrate to Substack, but I digress. Did you have a blog post about kind of the disability journey in the U.S., whether it be private insurance or Social Security disability? I went in for an interview, and they wound up springing a Pearson's cognitive test on me. The timing was perfect because it was afternoon, and as I could tell as I walked through this thing, fatigue increased. My cognition just went in the toilet.
Right.
It is. I agree with you. If you could address one of the symptoms, that would be great. But that was that wound up pushing my disability application over the goal line, and I'm on both private disability and Social Security disability to a myriad of things. And I think if I could try and show up to work one day, I would have to leave early and I would call in sick for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
Is fundamentally it. But that's exciting to hear about that trial. How best is Twitter? Twitter's probably a good place for people that are interested in that to, go through your thread and find information about that, but also to find the manual. What's the best resource for people to go and hear more about that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely following us on Twitter, both my personal, which is at Putrino Lab, and then at Core Sinai, CORESINAI. Those are two really good places to just see all the clinical trials that we're running. Core Sinai is frequently just like retweeting all of the trials that we're running. We're also on Blue Sky, and we try to spend more and more time on Blue Sky because it's friendlier. So
Right.
that's nice. And then also, yeah, we have a website on the Mount Sinai website. If you just Google the Cohen Center for Recovery from Complex Chronic Illness and Mount Sinai, the website shows up. And then we also are on Instagram. I am personally, my personal Putrino Lab Instagram is a hot mess. I'm terrible at being on Instagram, but Core Sinai is run by one of our amazing amazing sort of educational directors, Violet, and she does a phenomenal job.
That's in her wheelhouse.
Keeping everyone engaged and keeping everything going. We also do a monthly AMA, Ask Me Anything, where I just sort of get on and field questions.
Yeah, I think you've got one this week, although this will probably be pushed out and published after that, but before the end of March. But the AMA, what's the cadence of that?
Once a month. We try to do.
M is monthly.
And it's monthly. Yep.
Okay.
And it's just anyone can come on and ask anything. Some of the questions have been pretty wild, and some of the questions are quite good. But and we also just try to sort of edit those and get them out. So if you can't join synchronously, you can at least watch asynchronously.
Yeah, I will. I will post a couple of your interviews from last week because I don't think we hit the tip of the iceberg of the promising trials that you spoke about last week as it maps to that long list of symptoms. So I'll post that to my Twitter and we'll link it in this podcast because I think it's a much longer answer. But I want to be respectful of your time as we're running at the top of the hour. Do you have 1 minute left to close? I had one last thing for you.
Absolutely, I do. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to punish you like I did at Kiko. One of the things we do here on the Butterfly Pavilion podcast is movie quotes. It started out as me stumping my daughter on movie quotes. I use movies as part of my long COVID parody videos because I think you need entertainment, you need laughter, you need humor to deal with this. So I am going to spring a movie quote on you, and the idea is I state the quote, and you got to try and guess what movie it's from. Okay. I'm not going to use the name of the movie like I do with Nikki and give away the answer. But I'll give you a clue. This is a Western movie, ballroom setting. Excuse me. You're wanted, long COVID doctor. I reckon I'm downright popular. Are you a long COVID patient? Man's got to do something for a living these days. Dying ain't much of a living, boy. Any idea?
I don't know. I'm feeling like a Val Kilmer Tombstone.
You were very close, but it is The Outlaw Josie Wales, which is one of my favorite movies, and has got some classic lines like "Dying ain't much of a living," which I thought was appropriate because we're dealing with patients, and I will die from this because I've layered on stage 4 cancer, but I've tried to flip the switch, and we talk about trying to bring light into darkness because it's a dark topic. We started this conversation, I think, with, this is a very dark topic, but some days easier than others. Yesterday was a good day. Today's been a good day, so I will take that. Thank you so much for your time, David. And any parting comments?
No, well, thank you for what you're doing. I think it's so important to keep hope alive, and just in general, how incredible you have been over the years. Like, I'll just turn this into an ad for you in terms of, like, definitely when I'm feeling a little bit down, I can always get a laugh from some of the content that you're producing and putting out there, that with the sole goal of just getting people to laugh and bringing people together. So I can't tell you how much we appreciate what you're doing out there.
You can't tell me how much I appreciate that. I started doing a lot of that is nervous energy, part therapy, part advocacy, and also trying to attack some of those gaslighters that we talked about at the top of this, because this is very real, and there's some brilliant minds trying to help those in the long COVID community. So with that, I'll let you go, and thank you so much for joining the Butterfly Pavilion podcast.
Thank you, Ty. We'll talk soon.
Our final Jeopardy is name this gaslighter in a picture. Write down your answers and how much you're willing to wager. This cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs COVID denier propositions women on aeroplanes with money and was last seen mask shaming at a Golden State Warriors game. And lastly, Seeking Boston writes, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, who is Harry Balzac? You are correct, Seeking Boston, and you win $500.